Today I'm going to show you how to make some chroma style effects using Unreal Engine 5 to make something look like this, or this, or this. So without further ado, let's do that and learn some motion graphics things. Alright, so the first thing we have to do before we do anything else is we have to make a seamless material. And the way we're going to start that is in After Effects. So we're going to make a new comp, and in this comp we'll call this Seamless Text, and we only need one frame. We're basically just making a single image, so we can just say one frame. You could do this in Photoshop, but I know After Effects better. Make sure that you set the comp width and height to at least 4K. We want this to be high res so that the material doesn't look crunchy and pixelated and gross. Click OK, and we're going to hit Control Y on our keyboard, and we're going to call this Seamless Noise. Now, from here, we're going to add a noise texture. So we'll go to our effects and presets, and we'll type in fractal noise and drag that on. Now, because this is pretty big, we can bring down the complexity to like 1.5. We can bring up the brightness or bring down the brightness, really just up to you, and bring down the contrast. And then we're going to go into the transform and scale this up by a lot, like 1,000, maybe 700, something that looks really soft and pillowy. The effect we're going for is kind of like 2 or 3 lights rotating around a metal object, so not a ton of detail, just enough to imply this effect. Now, the issue with this is that it is not seamless on the top, bottom, left, and right, so we need to add an adjustment layer. Hit Control, Alt, and Y, and we'll call this Seam Fix. I changed my mind. We're actually going to call this Offset, and from here we're going to add another effect, and we're going to type in Offset, and we're going to drop this onto our object. Now, it's not doing anything right now on this adjustment layer, but if we set the shift center to 0 and 0, we're going to get a seamless texture on the left and right, but we're getting this really hard seam down the middle. We need to fix that, and we're going to do that by creating more adjustment layers. So we'll take this offset, and we'll call this Seam Fix 1. And what we're going to do on this first one is we're going to reset it, and then we're going to set the value on the X property to 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit Q on our keyboard and make a mask directly down the middle. And then we're going to hit F on our keyboard and feather that by like 150. Just enough so that we don't get any seamless edges. If you look really closely, there's a little bit there, but you can just increase the feather. And on a 3D object, this seam won't be that noticeable anyways, so I'm not too concerned about that. We're going to take this seam fix and we're going to duplicate it. And then we're going to hit MM on our keyboard, and we're going to delete this mask. And then on the Seam Fix 2, or the offset, whatever we want to call it, this second layer that's on top, we're going to reset it again, and then set the second value, the Y, and we're going to set that to 0. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to make a mask. So select our mask tool, go right down the middle, this time horizontally, hit F, and feather it out again. We don't need to be too precise, just enough so that it is seamless. Now we're going to hit Control Alt Y one more time, and we are going to call this Color. And then we're going to add one of my favorite effects in After Effects, and that is the Colorama effect. This Colorama effect will basically change and interpolate color values between 0 and 1 or black and white. So now when we put it on, it's changing the color, and if we go into the output cycle, we can change these colors to anything we want. We can get some pre-made effects like this copper effect, or we can go to rusty, sepia. Let's just try rusty for now. And from here, the one thing I want to make sure that I do is I want this to be a really subtle effect. So I'm actually going to go into the noise and adjust some of the values a little bit till I get something that looks pretty soft and not too detailed. I actually want to get rid of a lot of these little tiny splotchy bits. So I'm going to change the contrast by bringing that down a little bit lower. and maybe bring up the brightness just a touch, maybe bring it down.
2,000 years later.
Now I'm pretty happy with this after playing with some of these values. So the next thing I have to do is I have to export this as an HDRI file. So I'm going to hit Control M on my keyboard. I'm going to go to the output module. I'm going to set this to HDR sequence, and then I'm going to save this somewhere on my computer. I have this folder right here, Seamless Texture Tutorial. Double click on that, and I'm not going to save it in a subfolder. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select this output module and hit Control D, and I'm going to make a PNG sequence as well. And the reason why is I want to double check to make sure that this is seamless in another 3D software, just to make sure. So we're going to hit render on that, and it should only take a second because we're only rendering single frames. We can jump over to Cinema4D, and I have this plane right here. We're just going to use this as our base to make sure that this is seamless. So let's navigate to that image. So I have it right here, and I just have this PNG, and I'm just going to bring this into Cinema4D, make sure I have my texture selected, delete that old one, and add in this new one. Drop it on my plane, and I want to tile it by 5 times. Now, I really just want to make sure that the seams are not super harsh. This looks fine for me. We're not going to be tiling it that much in Unreal. This is purely to double check whether it's seamless or not. Now, before we go any further, I do want to give you a little bit of a pro tip. I think that the After Effects method works, and it is technically the free option, but I'm going to share with you how I used World Creator to create another seamless texture that I think will give us more creative results. So I have World Creator open, and this is software that is typically used for creating height maps for video game levels and environments and cool stuff like that. But there's a really cool feature in it that I love for creating seamless textures, and that is this Seamless X and Z. We can select that, and now I know for a fact that this procedurally noise generating piece of software will create seamless edges on the edges of my frame. So I don't need to worry about that offset effect, and it'll do a better job. So the last thing I want to do here before I make something creative is set the metering to about 1/4. And this is basically going to make a 4K image for me, something pretty big. I could even go to 8K, but this should be fine for my needs. Now what I love about this software is we can go into the filters, add a filter, and I really love the swirl effect. I think it creates a really cool metallic style look pretty easily. And if I hit the save button and I go here, add to my export presets and a height map, I select the height map, I select the PNG, it's going to give me an image just like this, and this is seamless. So I'm good with this, to be honest. What I can do from here is select 16-bit and save this wherever I want. So I'm going to do that. Save this into the corresponding folder. Now the reason why we're jumping back to After Effects is because the image we just exported from World Creator is still a PNG, and we need to make sure that it's an HDRI file. So we're going to go into wherever we saved this. I found that height map right here and drag this into After Effects, and I can just take this image, put it under my color effects settings, and there we go. Now it does look a little crunchy, so I'm just going to go into the colors and maybe just make something a little different so we can have multiple looks, maybe golden. That's probably going to be perhaps a little too much. Sure, that looks fine. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this as an HDRI and a PNG sequence one more time. So HDRI sequence, and I'm going to call this WC. And then duplicate the output module and PNG sequence just for the sake of demoing that it is seamless. Call that WC, render, give it a second, and then we'll check it before we jump into Unreal. Back in Cinema4D, got to do that check. Just got to make sure that all the cool stuff for all the tutorials are exactly where they need to be. We got this seamless texture right there, and drop you on and set the tiling to 5 and 5. And yep, we definitely got a seamless texture. Obviously the edge is a little bit harsh. We didn't do any adjustments on this level to make it less contrasty. So if we wanted to adjust it, we could just very easily export a couple different options. of this texture and get a different result. But for this tutorial, this is fine. So now that I know that this is a seamless texture, I can finally go into Unreal and create that chrome effect. So in Unreal, I have a really simple scene here with the Unreal Engine logo because Unreal is awesome, and I have this geometry that has multiple material selections. I need to make this chroma material. So let's make a new folder in our content browser. Let's right click on our content browser, new folder, call this materials tut, and go into that folder. Let's make a material by right clicking and new material. We'll call this chroma tut. Sweet. We can double click on that and pull up our material node editor. This is where we're going to have some fun with some nodes. They're not scary, but we have to do a little bit more than just changing the color and making it metal. The first thing I want to do is I want to take this HDRI for both textures and just bring it into this folder. You might want to organize this a little bit better, but for this tutorial, we're going to keep it quick and dirty. In this node editor, we're going to take whichever material that we want to use. We're going to drag this in, but we're not going to plug it into our final output just yet. We have to add a couple of things. Because we're using an HDRI image, we have to add this node called Rotate About Axis. So we'll right click in the empty space and we'll type Rotate About Axis. Now, from here, we have to plug in a couple of things. Obviously, there's 4 nodes. We need to add 4 things, and it'll basically tell us how to animate this material and this texture. So the first thing is a color node. So we're going to hold 3 on our keyboard, and we're going to plug this into our normalized rotation axis. We're going to set the value, the constant value, to red, and just leave it at that for now. We're going to right click on that color node and set convert to parameter, and we'll call this color animation control. After we set up this color, let's just make some space, and we're going to add another node. We're going to right click and we'll type time. We're going to drop in a time node. Then we're going to take a multiply node. We're going to hold M on our keyboard and make a multiply node by clicking in the empty space and holding M. Plug the time value into the A, and then we're going to hold 1 on our keyboard to make a constant node, and we will add that to the B. So now we can take the multiply and plug it into the rotation angle. Now we're going to right click on the constant node that we just made and convert to parameter, and we'll call this speed. With the speed node, we can set this default value to 0.05, and it's good to remember that a single rotation will happen over 1 second. So if we set this value to 1, it'll rotate our texture by 1 full revolution. That's really fast, so 0.05 should get us exactly where we need. After that, we're going to hold 1 on our keyboard again, and we're going to add another constant node, and we'll plug this into the pivot point, and then we'll right click on that constant, convert to parameter, and we'll call this pivot point. Sweet. Lastly, we're going to type in a reflection vector. Reflection vector WS, and we're going to plug this into the position. Now, before we plug this into the texture sample, we have to add this onto the texture. So we'll hold A on our keyboard and click in the empty space. Now we have the add node there, and we can plug the rotate about axis into the A, and then plug this value into the UV of the texture. Now, the last thing is take the reflection vector and pipe this into the B value of the add node. And then we can take this texture sample and plug it into the base color. And now we're going to get a scrolling sort of effect on our material. But it doesn't look chrome quite yet. Fortunately, from this point, we can start just adding some of our basic nodes to our outputs, such as the metallic, the specular roughness, etc., to create that chrome looking effect. So we're going to hold 1 on our keyboard, we'll add another constant node, and we'll do that a couple times. And we're going to take this value, this first constant, and plug it into the metallic. We'll take this constant, plug it into the specular, plug this constant into the roughness. What we're going to do is hold M on our keyboard and plug this multiply into the emissive, take this constant, the fourth constant here, and plug this into the B value of the multiply, and then take the texture sample and plug this into the A value of the multiply. Now, to make this procedural and easy to edit, we're going to make all of these parameters as well, these constant values. So let's select all these constant values, control click to add to our selection, right click, convert to parameter. And now let's rename them. You can select the first one and type in metallic. The hotkey to rename is also F2 on your keyboard in case you needed to know. The second value is the specular. The third value is going to be our roughness. And then the fourth value is going to be our emissive intensity. Now this metallic value, we want it to be chrome, so let's set that default value to 1. And magically, we have a very cool looking chrome effect right off the bat. I'm pretty stoked with that already. So what we can do from here is we can hit save, and from here, I want to go back to my content browser. In my Unreal window, right click on that material, set create material instance, and now we can go to our 3D object, and with our object or our material selected in our content browser, we can select the use selected asset from content browser, this little circle arrow thing, and just start clicking down until we change the material to our desired effect. Now it's still a little dark, it's kind of hard to see the chroma, but that is why we created a material instance, because what we can do is go into the emissive intensity, crank it up just a little bit so it's a little bit brighter, and then because of the way animation for materials works in Unreal, the X, Y, and Z values are also pertained or associated to color. So what we can do is we can change this value from red to like blue, and it'll change the animation look so that it's moving along the corresponding axis we want it to. So it's either RGB, red, green, blue, and we can see that when we get closer to that blue value, we're getting a little bit of a scrolling effect of that chrome. And that is exactly what we wanted. We can just move this color value around, and it'll change the position in which the animation is scrolling. And we can also select that, go into our speed, and crank it up if we want to. And now we get a much faster chrome looking effect. Or we can slow it down, we can brighten it up, and we have a really cool chrome effect. Super easy, and all driven procedurally through a time node. So I'm going to set this color back to like the blue value, just because I felt that the blue was the best axis that this geometry performed at. You'll have to adjust this based on whatever your model is doing, so just be willing to be flexible. Let's select OK. Let's bring down the speed to about 0.08. Sure, that looks fine for me. Now, in the demo of this tutorial, I did demonstrate some cool looking surface imperfections, and we're going to do that right now. So we're going to go back to our material, and we have this roughness right here. This is where we're going to add our surface imperfections. So we're going to add more than a handful of nodes, but it's going to help create a procedural scratches effect on our geometry, whatever that may be. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a multiply node, hold M, click, and we're going to add this into the roughness channel. And we're going to take this roughness and pipe this into the A value. So now we're still setting it to 0. We're going to take another multiply node, hold M, and with that multiply node, that is where we're going to create our scratches effect. So we need to go into any folder on our computer where we have saved some sort of scratches texture, and you can typically find those online, like Googling surface imperfections. I'm using something from Grayscale Gorilla, but there's tons of things that you can find online. Just look up scratches texture. And you have to make sure that it looks like a black and white image, kind of like this, where it's just kind of scratchy, just like that. Ideally it's seamless, but hey, work with what you got. Back in our node tree here, we're going to take this value and plug this into the A of the multiply, and then we're going to go into our empty space, hold 1, and we're going to pipe this constant node into our B value of this new multiply. Then we're going to take this multiply node and pipe it into the second multiply. Now it's not doing anything right now, and that's because this value is 0. Let's right click on it and set it to a parameter, and we'll call this scratches intensity. And we'll set this value to 1. Now I did realize I made a little bit of a boo-boo. We don't want to multiply the roughness, we actually want to add it. Now the reason why we do that is because if we want to change the roughness value where it's not fully chromatic, it might be just a little bit more matte, less reflective, we want that value to be adjustable by itself. So we're going to hold A on our keyboard, add an add node, drag this default roughness on top, and then we're going to set the roughness with the add node, and right now it's taking a value of 0, and then if the B value is 1, it's a total value of 1. But if we add in the scratches on top of that, where a value of 0 is black and a value of 1 is white, then if we go into this parameter right here, this scratches, we call this scratches, and set the default value to 1, now we get that scratches effect. Now what's really cool about this workflow and method is we can take this material sample, right click on it, and convert to parameter, and we'll call this scratches text. And then we'll go into this texture sample up here, right click, and set this to the chroma color, and then we hit save on that. Let's go back to our geometry in our scene, and we're already getting that scratches effect. Super cool. But wait, there's more. Now what we can do is we can double click on this, and we can go in. Obviously we can adjust the intensity still for the emissive, so it's brighter. We can adjust the speed, but we can also change the color to the other HDRI that we imported earlier. So we can take this other one that we made with After Effects and drop it on, and it's going to give us a similar result, and we can just swap out those textures with whatever we want. In addition, we can also go into this texture right here, this scratches, and change that look. So if I find this other scratches texture right here and just replace that right there, now we have a much more scratched up logo style look. We can crank up the speed, we can crank up the emissive, we can do a lot of really cool stuff with this material. So I love this effect. I'm super stoked about it, and I hope you enjoy making cool stuff like this. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you learned something, let me know in the comment section down below, or if you have questions, comments, concerns, whatever else, comment section is down there for that as well. If you do make something with this, I would love to see it, so do post that on Instagram or whatever social media platform of choosing that you like, and tag me at John Jagsney pretty much everywhere. And I will leave you with the final tip, and that is to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. You make some... Goodbye, my friends. Bye.